Father, we thank you for an opportunity that we can come together and just talk about these things that pertain to you and how they relate to us as a community. And I pray that you would help us to focus and to consider what we're going to look at today and apply what we're going to learn to our lives. In Yeshua's name, amen. So are the fans okay? Does that feel all right? I think the little birds have grown up and flown away because I haven't been hearing them, so I think they're gone. So no, it was too close. It was too loud. Okay, so today we're going to get started talking about the Moedim. You got your papers in front of you, so let's just start talking straight off the top. Leviticus 23. This is where we find the list of God's appointed times, and I will read this. And the reason I want to get started in the Moedim because I want us to finish covering all this before we get to the fall festival, so we can all be ready and ready for the fall festival. So Leviticus 23, it starts off, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times which you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed times are these. For 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwellings." And so we see right off the bat the first convocation, the first Moedim, the first Moed is Shabbat. Now the word Moed, it's usually translated as an appointed time. So Shabbat is an appointed time, but the initial meaning of the word Moed was a meeting place. It meant a meeting place. In Exodus 27 and verse 21, it mentions the tent of meeting. When God said he was going to meet with Moses and Aaron, he would meet with them in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. It was called the tent of meeting, and in Hebrew it's Ohel Moed. And so it was the meeting place. And because Shabbat is called a Moed, it makes it clear to us that this day is set apart so God could meet with his people. That's the point of Shabbat. It's a time that we're supposed to come together and meet with our God. And that's always usually how I open up Shabbat, with that prayer that he has called us to come together and to meet with him. Because that's what the appointed times are. They're meeting times. It's kind of like when you start a new job and the boss will set up times of meeting whenever you have like a review, maybe a once a month review or whatever, but you set up appointments to meet with your employer or your supervisor or whatever. In the same way, God wants to meet with us, and so he sets up these appointments, and he expects us to be there. He's there waiting for us, and the Shabbat is a weekly appointment that he's coming to meet with us. And so because Shabbat is a Moed, it's understood that it is a time of convocation for all of us to come together. And so therefore, from the outset, the Shabbat immediately takes on a community aspect. And so if we're supposed to come together, initially, primarily, Shabbat is about coming together as a community, for us coming together as a group of people. Moed is usually translated convocation or a gathering or an assembly of people. And again, Shabbat is not primarily an individual thing. It's primarily a community thing where we come together. And yes, Shabbat is intended to give rest and reflection for us as individuals. When we come, we're supposed to rest as individuals. When we come to Shabbat, we're supposed to reflect on his word and take these things in individually. But again, it was established on the context of community, where everyone comes together to meet with God in a special way. Okay, so let's look at these different aspects of Shabbat. First of all, Shabbat is a sign. The primary meaning of the word Shabbat is to cease or to stop, and from this comes the meaning of rest. Right? The opposite of doing something is stopping, and so to cease, to stop and rest. And so this is where we get the idea of ceasing from one's work. But it's also used sometimes as a technical term for keeping the day of rest as a sign of the covenant. And so Shabbat, and when you keep the Shabbat, it is a sign of the covenant, like it says here in Exodus 31, 12 through 13. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "But as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, and say, you shall surely observe my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Adonai, who sanctifies you." So the Shabbat sanctifies us. Shabbat sets us apart. When we lived in a cul-de-sac there in North Glen, our neighbors next to us were Muslims. And then there was another family, a couple of families there that were Christians. And then us, we were Messianic. And so on Fridays, we'd see the Muslims get dressed, and we'd see them take off. And they would go to their masjid or their prayer room, whatever they called it. Then on Saturdays, they would see us pack up and take off. And then they would see all of our friends come over to our house on Saturday night and be there all night long. And so they knew every Saturday what we were doing. And then on Sundays, we'd see the Christian folks get dressed up in the morning, Sunday morning, and they would go and do their thing. And so it's interesting how the days that we worship our God, the Christians worship God on Sunday, and then the Muslims worship their God on Friday. It's interesting how the days we can tell who we worship. We can tell who is our God by the days that we worship. So again, the day that we worship our God, it sanctifies us, it sets us apart. And then a few verses down from Exodus 31, 16 through 17. So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. So again, the Shabbat is it's a sign of the covenant. It's a sign of who we belong to. Some describe it as the wedding ring. And so a wedding ring, it helps us to know that we're married. And the Shabbat is a sign of who we are in covenant with. Shabbat is a sign between us and between God. And also, I think when it says between me and the sons of Israel forever, it is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. I think also it could possibly mean that it kind of points us out to God. We are serving you. He knows our hearts. He knows who we are. But still, it's a way for us to show God our devotion towards him and that our faithfulness to the covenant. Okay, the top of page 2, Shabbat is a memorial. In Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3, we find that Shabbat is the seventh day. It's the end of the creation week. It's a memorial of creation. And in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, it says, this is where, in Exodus 20, this is where we find the first giving of the Ten Commandments. Right? This is the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Adonai your God. In it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So in remembering the Shabbat, we remember the week of creation. We remember that God created everything. And in going through our liturgy on Shabbat, even our liturgy on Erev Shabbat, we're reminded of that Shabbat is a memorial of the creation and God resting on the seventh day. But then we look at the second giving of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy 5. It says, starting in verse 12, observe the Sabbath to keep it holy, as Adonai your God commanded you. 6 days you shall not labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Adonai your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, or your male or your female servant, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you, so that your male servant and your female servant may not rest as well as you. They may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Adonai your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So in remembering the Shabbat, we remember the week of creation, and in observing the Shabbat, we remember our exodus from Egypt. And so those are the two main things that we can remember in Shabbat, is creation and then God pulling us out of Egypt, the Exodus. The Exodus is the story of all stories. I mean, it's the story, it's the foundational story that we find throughout the Bible. It's the one story that everything keeps going back to. Even the death of Yeshua points back to the Exodus, and actually the Exodus pointed forward towards Yeshua. And so that's just an important part of our faith, is God bringing his people out of Egypt. The bottom of page 2, Shabbat was created before the Torah was given at Sinai. In Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts, By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. And so we see here in this particular passage, at the beginning of the Bible, Shabbat is established from the very beginning. And it's just interesting to think that if this is the case, at what point in the Bible do we see God, or God speaking through Moses or any of the prophets, or even Yeshua, saying that Shabbat is no longer the seventh day? The Sabbath is no longer important. From the beginning, God had established it, and it wasn't just for Jews. It wasn't just for Israel. It's for all mankind. The Sabbath is for everyone. It's for the earth. It's for everyone. And in this passage, it's interesting that this is the only day that receives a blessing. All the other days, God says they were good. Everything that he created was good, and the days started and they began, but you never see him blessing any of the days. The Shabbat's the only day that receives a blessing from God. And also, this is the one day, the one and only day that's designated as a day of rest for God. Now, God doesn't need a rest. When we read that passage, we say, okay, does God need rest because he was working for 6 days? No, the point is he's demonstrating to us what he wants for us to do. He's demonstrating what he expects or what he desires for mankind to do, is to rest on Shabbat. Shabbat is a gift for us and to rest and be refreshed from our labor. And again, we see God demonstrating that in Exodus 31 and verse 17. It says, "For in 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth, but on the seventh day he ceased from labor and was refreshed." You think God had to take a breather and get a cold glass of water and then he felt better? No, again, that's just a model for us and what we're supposed to do and what we will feel if we find rest in Shabbat. We should be refreshed. We should be filled with community involvement, hearing the word, physical rest, spiritual refreshment, even physical refreshment, and ready for the next week. That's what Shabbat is about. Shabbat is a gift for us to be read. Okay, I read that part. This is what Yeshua meant when he said, "The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath." He's talking about it was given to us as a gift so we can rest. That's the purpose for Shabbat. It was given to us. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, Yeshua said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So that means I can determine whatever it is that I want to do. Because it's made for man, so I can make the rules about the Sabbath. That's not what he's talking about. He's just showing them that it's a gift for us. Shabbat is a reference to our immediate physical rest, but also it ultimately points to the spiritual rest available from God through covenant relationship with him. Okay, so again, it's a physical rest, but it's also a spiritual rest, and it's meant to bring joy. It's not meant to be a burden. And I think that was Yeshua's point. So Shabbat is a day of no work. God considers Shabbat a very important and mandatory symbol. And we find in the scriptures that Shabbat can be desecrated through common work, called laborious work in some translations. It says the work that we do is just laborious work. And this phrase in the Hebrew, laborious work, is found 14 times in the Torah. And in each of the instances that it's mentioned, it's always connected to an appointed time. So it's contrasting resting, worshiping God, and celebrating against work. The basic understanding of this phrase is working at one's own occupation. In other words, working to make income. That's the laborious work that it's talking about. Okay, it's talking about working to make income, to make money. And this is what is primarily prohibited on Shabbat. This is the type of work that's primarily prohibited. Now, although there's no obvious income in, say, like the duties of a homemaker, of a housewife, still the work that she does in a roundabout way brings income. If you consider if you consider if the husband had to care for the responsibilities at home, it would limit his ability to go out and do the work. And so in a way, it's a partnership so that the husband can go out and do the work. And so the wife takes care of the home, the husband gets to go to work. So in a roundabout way, it's still work. And it's still work in the home, and those things should be stopped during Shabbat. And also, this is just an area that has to be looked at in a case-by-case basis. Every family should determine what that looks like in their house. Every family should make that distinction of what that work looks like in their house. I know for us, we're not doing laundry, we're not folding clothes, we're not cleaning restrooms, because those things were already done ahead of time. Okay, now we might be ironing clothes, getting ready for Shabbat. We might be making breakfast, that sort of thing. But it's not, I'm not doing my work at the company that I work for. I might be doing stuff for the community. But you get the idea. Now, what about life-saving jobs? I think these things are important. And like for doctors and nurses and policemen, firemen, those kinds of jobs that save lives, the military, sometimes they're going to have to work on Shabbat because they're saving lives, and that's a good thing. We'll talk about the donkey in the ditch principle here in a minute, but we see that if your donkey's in a ditch, you don't just leave it there on Shabbat, you get it out. Why? Because it's a matter of life or death. So when it's a matter of life or death, we want to do those things. And you see Yeshua healing on Shabbat. All the time you see him going on Shabbat and he's healing, and they're saying, no, he's breaking Shabbat because he shouldn't be healing on Shabbat. Instead of saying, wow, he just healed this person, they're rebuking him. And so Yeshua is showing that he's demonstrating that doing these things that save lives and even that'll better a quality of life, those things are okay to do on Shabbat. Also, working on Shabbat is something that we grow into. It's not something that you can just overnight just say, okay, I'm going to stop. Like, for instance, if you've had a job where you've worked on Saturday and you've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, it's not going to be that easy for you to go in and tell your boss, hey, I can't work on Saturdays anymore. It might have to be a progression where you can move into that. Or you can't just stop and say, you know what, I'm not going to work in the restaurant business anymore because all the business happens on Saturdays. I'm now going to change my occupation. You quit your job. Well, we got to be prudent and we got to have wisdom and make the proper steps so that you're still able to provide for your family and do things correctly. But this is something that we grow into, and like we talked about last week in Shabbat service about judging, we have to allow for those who are learning to understand this, to come to an understanding, and then to make the right steps. Those of us that have been doing this for a while, we can't just go and start bashing those that are interested in the Torah and start trying to force them to catch up to us. This is something that people have to grow in, and we have to have grace and mercy in this area. Also in the scriptures, we see that the things that should have been done before Shabbat in preparation of Shabbat are not allowed on Shabbat either. That's why on Fridays it's called the day of preparation. It's the day that in our modern times we should be getting food, for Friday night, getting food for Saturday, putting gas in our car, and just getting everything that we need for Shabbat. So that way we're not going out on Shabbat. And in Numbers 15, we see the first major transgression of the prohibition to work on Shabbat. In Numbers 15, verse 32, we're on the top of page 4. Now, mind you, this is right after God tells them they're not supposed to work on Shabbat. He just gives them this instruction, you're not supposed to work on Shabbat. And then we come to this passage. Now, while the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood. So in other words, he was working. And more than likely, he was gathering wood to cook. Because it was Shabbat, there's probably about the time to start eating, so he was gathering wood. He was gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. And they put him in custody because it had not been declared what they should do to him. Then Adonai said to Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Now, that sounds pretty severe. The guy just goes out and he's gathered some wood on Shabbat. And so they take him to the edge of the camp, and they pelt him with stones and they kill him. Doesn't that seem kind of severe? Doesn't that, does the punishment really fit the crime? So this is something that we need to just consider in this passage. Is this a prescription of what is to be done for someone caught breaking Shabbat? Or could it be that this is the first situation where you find this, and so it was dealt with so severely because God wanted to demonstrate to us how important it was to him. He wanted to show his heart to the community and say, look, listen, I'm serious. I'm serious about this. Maybe in this case, this guy was just an example to everyone. It doesn't really say in the Torah that this is what is supposed to happen to someone if they break the Shabbat, if they go against the Shabbat. But God wants us to know that he takes Shabbat seriously, and I think he wants us to also. Because when we think about this passage, I know it's one of the things we want to consider when we look at Shabbat. Are we taking it seriously? Have we put Shabbat above everything else? Since working for income is prohibited on Shabbat, we can come to the logical conclusion that we're also prohibited from engaging in commerce. In other words, buying and selling. The Messianic community that we started out at, they used to go out to lunch after service. There was the pastor was friends with the owner of this little Mexican restaurant, and after service we would go up there and we would all have the big giant burrito and but we would say, oh no pork, because we understood that. But we would go to their restaurant and we would all have burritos and stuff, and the pastors would come. And I remember going through this with Margaret, and as we studied this is the conclusion that we came to. If we're not supposed to be buying and selling, if we're not supposed to be working, then what does that look like if I have someone else serving me? I'm telling them, you can work, but I can't. That's not a good witness. Because even if we look at them, if they're serving us, and if they would be considered our servants, it specifically says in the commandments, your male or your female servants are not supposed to be working on Shabbat. So why not? Why are we going to restaurants and having people serve us? Why are we going to the stores and having people serve us? And I remember once we stopped going, because we got to know the owners of that restaurant, at least by name, and we would talk to them every now and then. And so the next time we ran into those folks, they said, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. You guys don't come with everyone else. And we said, no, because we realized what the scripture said, and why should you be working, if we're not? And so I don't know if that really did anything for them, but at least it helped us understand what the scripture said, because it does mention that here in the scriptures. In Jeremiah 17 verses 19 through 23, this is what he says. This is Jeremiah, and he's talking to Israel and just kind of rebuking them for what they're doing. Thus Adonai said to me, go and stand in the public gate through which the kings of Judah come in and go out, as well as all the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, listen to the word of Adonai, kings of Judah, and all inhabitants of Jerusalem, who come in through these gates. Thus says Adonai, take heed for yourselves, and do not carry any load on the Sabbath day, or bring anything through the gates of Jerusalem. You shall not bring a load out of your houses on the Sabbath, nor on the Sabbath day, nor do any work, but keep the Sabbath day holy, as I commanded your forefathers. Yet they did not listen or incline their ear, but stiffened their necks in order not to listen or take correction. So what is the load that they're carrying? Well, they're working. They're working. They're bringing their stuff in the city. They're bringing their stuff out of their homes. It's obviously they're bringing their goods so they can come and they can sell. The next passage is from Nehemiah. It says a similar thing. In those days I saw in Judah some who were treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, and they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on the day they sold food. Also, men of Tyre were living there, who imported fish and all kinds of merchandise and sold them to the sons of Judah on the Sabbath, even in Jerusalem. Then I reprimanded the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing you are doing by profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do the same, so that our God brought on us and this city all this trouble? Yet you are adding to the wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." So again, that's pretty clear right there, that they were buying stuff, they were engaging in commerce on Shabbat. And so this is something for us to consider. And again, if we've prepared and we've got everything done that we needed to on Shabbat, if we did that on Friday, then we won't have to go out. We won't need to go out on Shabbat. So I think we should try to do our best and not engage in commerce on Shabbat in order to make the day special and in order to set it apart. And just do the best that we can at that. I mean, yeah, sometimes we're going to come into a situation where we might have to. But I think God is going to honor that if we put aside all the things that like we might want. In fact, on Shabbat, I guess here's a scenario. Say, for instance, one of your children is sick, and you run out of medication. Well, that might be a case where maybe you can go because it's about health. Probably not life or death, but it may be a health situation. Here's another scenario. You don't like the shirt that you have for service, so you want to run over to Target and pick yourself up a shirt because you just want, a nice shirt. That's probably not a good reason to engage in commerce on Shabbat. So again, if we're prepared, we won't need to engage in commerce on Shabbat. And again, it's the more we come into an understanding of the importance of Shabbat and the importance of Shabbat in God's eyes, then it'll be that important for us. And off the bat, immediately, one of the things that I hate, immediately we'll be able to say, you know what, it's on, this event's happening on Shabbat, I'm not going to do it. Whatever it is, if it's going to take away from my community or whatever, then I'm not going to engage in it. One of the things that I hate is that they have these. I don't know if K-Love has done any free concerts lately, but they used to do these free concerts and they would announce it on the radio. Free concert, so-and-so is coming, and they would just give the date. And I'm driving in the car and I'm thinking, what day of the week is that? That's important. I need to know what day of the week is that, because if that's going to take away from my community, I'm not going to be a part of it. Even if it is a service event. I mean, someone had invited us to go see Paul Wilbur. They said, you can play hooky from your community and come to our community and come watch Paul Wilbur. And I'm thinking, no, it's Shabbat. If I'm in town, I'm with my community. And because, again, it's the perspective that we have on Shabbat and the value that we put on it. Because also, parents, the value that we put on Shabbat is what our children are seeing. And it's what they're going to adopt. And it's what they're going to do. Be a light and be an example to those around you who don't follow Shabbat. When we walk in Shabbat, again, people are going to see us and they're going to test us. Again, thankfully, our family isn't around here, but I know back in Texas, none of our family really walks in Shabbat. We got Margaret has one sister who has an understanding of Shabbat, but the rest of the families, they don't. And so that's where all the birthdays happen. That's where all the picnics happen and all the family events happen. And so they're always pulling on her and they're saying, "Oh, you can just miss service and come to our celebration, come to our birthday party, come to Chuck E. Cheese or come to whatever, and come and do these celebrations." And so that's a difficult thing for them. But for us here, we typically just hang out with everyone here in the community. But for instance, at work, when there's stuff, if people invite me to go and do stuff with people that I work with, I can just automatically say, no, it's Saturday. On Saturdays, my whole day's gone. In fact, I was looking for a part-time job once, and it's like, okay, Friday nights and Saturdays, I can't work. And if we have that mentality right off the bat, we're not going to have any problems. But if we go into a job and we don't tell them that, and then we change our minds, or then we mention it to them later, then that's when it's usually going to have problems. Did you have a comment, Margaret? Yeah. Since they were little, it's always been our intention to keep our kids, singing, and I like to keep them in front of people so they can get used to being in front of folks. And we put them in various things, in different choirs and just different even dance things, and but we always knew that if it happened on Shabbat, we weren't going to do it because it's Shabbat, and especially if it took away from our community. If it happened maybe in the evening, we would do it. But if it happened during the service, no, we're not going to miss service to do these extracurricular things, because again, we're little by little we're showing our children that nothing should come in between us and Shabbat except for this, or except for for this thing or that thing. I even challenged someone about graduation, their child's high school graduation, and I remember when they told me, they said, "Oh, by the way, next week we're not going to be in service because our child is graduating from high school." I said, but I said, "You homeschool, right?" And they said, "Yeah." They said, "But we're a part of this one group, and they schedule it for Saturday." And I said, "Well, how long have you been walking in Torah?" "Oh, 5 years." I said, "Okay, so well before they were in high school. And so you didn't have any foresight to consider how their graduation in 4 years, and you made no effort to try and do anything about that?" Because that's the beauty of homeschool. We could do that. We could do that whenever. And so it was actually an area, where we kind of argued. Now, again, if they had just started walking in Torah and they were just totally new, then I'd be like, "Oh, okay, cool." But they were very strong in their Shabbat, except for this one area. And so again, I'm thinking, what are we communicating to our children? Even like sports events and education events. If we're allowing these things to interrupt our Shabbat time, what we're telling our children is physical activity is more important than our God, and even things that regard our knowledge are more important than God. And that's a very Greek mindset. That is a very Greek mindset. The body and the mind, elevating those things above God. That's a very Greek mindset. When we get to Hanukkah, we'll talk about that. So here's a quote from Tim's commentary. He says, "The Sabbath should be marked out as a day different from the 6 days of work. It should be marked by rest from one's normal labors, allowing the day to be set apart for community life centered in worship and study of the Scriptures." And so that's what we're trying to do here at Front Range, is that we want to start the day off, come have some breakfast, have a bagel, let's hang out. We'll go through our service, we'll hear the word, we'll just sing some songs, do some dances, then we'll eat, and then we'll get back into some more Bible study and discussion and fellowship. And then if whoever sticks around, we'll eat again, and then we'll continue on the fellowship. And we don't do that any other day. We can't. But on Shabbat, there's nothing else for us to do but to be together, and that's what we should do. He continues on, "It was the regular practice of Yeshua to gather together with others in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and we do well to follow his example." So we see in the Scriptures that Yeshua was in the synagogue on Shabbat, and so should we. It says he was in the synagogue as was his custom, and so we should be there too. There's some who think that staying home and just digging in your garden. I remember hearing people saying that before, that for them, Shabbat meant that they stay home and they dig in their garden, and that was just enough peace for them, and that was rest. And And that was their fellowship with God. Well, that's nice. I mean, but it's missing the mark of convocation. It's missing the mark of coming together. Because again, Shabbat is primarily intended to be in community. It's not primarily meant to be by yourself. Now, if you're out of town and there's nowhere for you to attend service, then yeah, you can maybe go take a walk around the park of the city that you're at, or have a picnic or whatever. But I think wherever we're at, whenever you go on a trip, again, if you go on a vacation somewhere, you typically don't, it's not a surprise. You know you're going to go somewhere. And so in your preparation, one of the things that you can do is look for a Messianic community in the immediate area. If you can't find a Messianic community, try a Reform synagogue. Or try, I think that'd be a kind of cool experience. But it'll be just like a one-time thing. But the idea is to be in service, be in a shul, in a synagogue, or a Messianic community on Shabbat. Now, there's a couple tricky passages that people get kind of tripped up on Shabbat, and this is one of them, Exodus 35, verse 3. It says, "You shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day." Now, a lot of folks, they'll kind of tie this into the other passage where the guy is carrying the wood. And they'll even mistake him, and they'll think that, okay, the guy was carrying the wood, and God said, don't kindle a fire. No, he was just carrying wood. He was working on Shabbat. This is something different, where God says, you shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on Shabbat. So does this mean we can't turn on lights, electricity? Does this mean we can't drive? Because when we turn on a car, if you know anything about engines, the combustion engine, it's like shooting off a spark with the spark plugs. It's burning the gas, and there's little explosions in the engine, and that's what causes the pistons to move, and that's what causes the car to go. So it's really like a little fire happening in the engine. Is that what God's talking about here? Or maybe he's saying no furnaces. We can't have furnaces on. So people who live in, say Alaska or somewhere where it's really cold, in the wintertime, they can't have a furnace on Shabbat, and so they sit there and they shiver. So is this what's being talked about here? I mean, that would not be a pleasurable experience. Imagine if we did that here. If we just said, you know what, we can't have the furnace on in the wintertime, so we just sit here and shiver. I don't think this is what it's talking about. And actually, several times, as people come to our community, and people have come in the past, we've had different comments, like, we cook, we heat up our food, and they say, you're turning on the gas stove, you're kindling a fire. Or we go and we meet at the park, and they say, you're turning on a charcoal grill, that's kindling a fire. But I don't think this is what it's talking about. More than likely, it's a reference to going about the day as usual. It's, back in ancient times, in the morning, they'd have to get up and they have to start a fire and get that fire going, and that fire had to last for the rest of the day because they had to cook breakfast, they had to cook lunch, they had to cook dinner. And so the idea is going about your day like it's any other day. Starting a barbecue grill on Shabbat, to me, that's a form of pleasure. That's fun. It's not like in ancient times when they would have to gather a lot of wood and they would have to really work towards making a fire. And so, again, I think this has to go along with, in the context of the first century, or even back in the biblical times, what did it take to make a fire? What did it take to do that? And what was their normal day like? Does that make sense? Considering the way that they lived? Okay. Then here's another passage. Exodus 16 and verse 29 says, "Remain every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the seventh day." So again, when we look at passages, we have to look at them in the context that they were given, in the context that they were said. And this passage was in the context of the giving of the manna in the wilderness. Remember, on Fridays, they were supposed to go out and gather twice as much manna because on Shabbat, on Saturday, God wasn't going to give any manna. And so people were going out on Saturday mornings looking for manna, and there was none there. And so that act of them going out looking for manna, it showed they didn't have faith in God. And so by them staying in their house, it means that they believed God, they trusted Him, and that whatever they gathered was going to be sufficient for the seventh day. So it was an act of faith. It's not saying that we can't leave our homes on Shabbat. And again, that's what some folks say. It says remain in your homes. And so on Shabbat, I don't go anywhere. I just stay in my home. That's not what it's talking about. That's not the context. The rabbinics have taken this idea to stay in one's place and understood it to mean one's village or one's city. And this is where the idea of the Sabbath day's journey comes from, where you have only a certain area that you can walk in, and within that certain area, if you stay within that, you're not breaking the Sabbath. But if you walk beyond that, then you've broken the Sabbath. You've walked too far. You've gone beyond a Sabbath day's journey. And they base this on how far the ark traveled before the people. In Joshua 3 and verse 4, it talks about 2,000 cubits the ark was in front of the people. And so they took that 2,000 cubits and they said, okay, if we can walk within a 2,000 cubic area, then we're not breaking the Sabbath. And so they turned that into the Sabbath day's journey. And even I've heard what they said is it's 2,000 cubits from your personal property. And so they would take a bunch of handkerchiefs, and they would take the handkerchief and they would walk about a Sabbath day's journey, and they would drop a handkerchief and say, that's my property. Now I can walk another 2,000 cubits, to get away, so they wouldn't be technically breaking the Sabbath. And so again, with man-made traditions, you can change them like that, because that wasn't prescribed in the Torah. That was a man-made tradition, and so you can see how they can manipulate those traditions. But today, the Orthodox, they still follow this, and they live in neighborhoods that they call eruv, and it's kind of the same idea. They have this marked out area, and some of them, they'll have like a little string or a rope on a pole in the cities, in major cities, and they'll have these around. And so the Orthodox will know that they're inside the eruv, and they can, if they go past that, they're going to break the Sabbath day's journey, and so they can stay in there. Well, there's one here in Denver, near Monaco in Colorado. That's like the center of the eruv, but there's an eruv area over there where the Orthodox will live in, and they can walk within that area, and they're not breaking the Sabbath. If you travel a long distance to service, try and stay there as long as you can in order to rest with the community. So, again, the idea of traveling on Shabbat, sometimes it happens. There's some folks who drive, I think the Carlsons right now might be the furthest from Brighton, and the Partridges from up on their mountain, and then, of course, the Lords. The Washingtons, yeah, they come all the way from Greeley. And so that's why they come every other week, because it's too much for them to come every week. And so that's great that they do that. I mean, that's great that they would at least make that effort to come. I wish they would stay longer and hang out and rest, But at least they're making that trek to come out here. Here's another quote from Tim. Yeshua taught that emergencies on the Sabbath could suspend some of the Sabbath laws. For instance, caring for an animal. This is what some people call the donkey in the ditch principle. Caring for an animal on the Sabbath could require otherwise prohibited activities. Likewise, the priest who performs their duties on the Sabbath actually engage in work and thus break the Sabbath, but this is permissible because of the holy duty they perform. And so I can relate to that, because the elders or pastors, it sometimes feels like you're working on Shabbat because of all the stuff that we have to do, setting up, breaking down, just doing all these things. It sure can feel like you're working, but you're doing it for God. And if we didn't do it, the service wouldn't happen. So it's one of those things that we're doing for God. But in this donkey in the ditch principle, my understanding of the principle is that it's a life or death situation. I've heard some people say, well, my son's in a football league, and we got to play this game, and it's a donkey in a ditch. Is that life or death? You know what I mean? When we put these things in the context, and when we have a value of the Shabbat, we're going to be able to weigh those things. But I think some people look at it and they say, well, there's 52 Sabbaths in the year. What's one of them? I'm just going to miss one. What's the big deal? Again, that's a Christian. It's a Greek mentality. It's it's a mentality that you come in and you just check in, and then you leave, and that's it. I can't imagine missing Shabbat. I can't imagine staying home. Well, especially with the role that I have. I remember growing up in the Catholic Church. Our church was 3 blocks from our house. And no matter how bad the weather was, the priest was there. And I remember there was some security there, knowing that there was always going to be church service. There's always going to be Mass. And that's the kind of security I want everyone to have here at Front Range. We've never canceled the service. Well, I'll take that back. We canceled once when the toilet overflowed, and that was kind of a hygiene thing because we had to get the carpets clean. When we were at the White Building. And but I think other than that, I don't think we haven't canceled any service. And I'm not trying to brag, but I'm just trying to say that it's that important to me. It's that important, and I want to demonstrate that to my children, that we should do whatever we can to be there at service. There was again at the community we attended before. I never heard this taught, but this was kind of the assumed thing with this donkey in the ditch principle. If you found that you were in a tough situation, you could determine that, okay, it's a donkey in the ditch, and then you can just go and do whatever it was. This was one experience that I did, that I had. Our water main broke. Our water main, our front porch, it had sunk, and the concrete had sunk down, and it had snapped the water main. And so I found that out, I think, on a Friday afternoon, so we had to cut the water off. And I thought, donkey in a ditch, we need water. If we don't have water, then, hey, we need water. And so I talked to my neighbor, who was a plumber, and he had told me that on Saturday, he says, if you bust out that concrete and you dig down to that, he goes, I'll fix it for you for free. And so that's why I said, okay, I got to get this done. I can only do it on Saturday. And so I went and I got the hammer drill or the powered hammer thing, and drilled it out and dug it out. And after service, some of the guys that hung out with us there at the community, they came and they helped us. But then looking back on that, I thought, you know what? It wasn't life or death. It would have been one day. And the thing was, after checking my heart, if I would have done it on Monday, I would have had to use my vacation time. And I didn't want to use one of my vacation days. I was thinking selfishly. And because that was the other thing too. He couldn't do it on Sunday, but he could do it on Monday. And so I just didn't want to do it on Monday, because that was my vacation time. I didn't want to cut into my time, so I cut into my God's time. But there are instances where, someone's sick. If someone's sick, then we need to take them to the doctor, take them to the hospital. If there's a life or death situation, then we need to address that. But also, I'm sick. I'm not going to go to service. Okay, check yourself. Would you not go to work feeling the same way? Would you take a sick day during the week, or would you tough it out and say, you know what, I'm going to go to work because I don't want to take a sick day? But when it comes to Shabbat, are you saying, I just don't want to go? Does that make sense? A lot of that, we have to have some introspection. We have to look at our heart and understand our motive and be honest with ourselves. What is the reason that we're saying, you know what, I can't make it to service? Another interesting thing to consider is Yeshua's burial. Because it was Shabbat, it was a Friday night when he died. He was on the cross and he died. He died before Shabbat was over. But they did not give him a proper burial. They didn't touch him. The famous Catholic paintings and statues of Mary sitting at the base of the cross holding Jesus, that didn't happen. She would have been defiled for Passover. She would have been defiled for Shabbat. She didn't do that. Joseph of Arimathea, he took the hit for everyone. He's the one that got Yeshua's body. It's clear. The scripture's clear. He took Yeshua's body. He wrapped him up and he put him in in a grave, but it wasn't a proper burial. Why? Because the Shabbat was coming. They knew who Yeshua was, the Son of God, the Messiah, and even that did not prevent them from breaking Shabbat. I think that's telling about what he taught them and how important it was for them at that time. Again, Shabbat was given to us to make our life joyful and not burdensome. And so, you might be listening to some of these things and thinking, man, that's difficult. That's tough. There's a lot of things that maybe we do on Shabbat, but again, it's something that we grow in. And I'm only saying these things to challenge you, for you to consider, and most importantly, consider what are we demonstrating to our children. What are the things that we are setting in place for them? Because the standards that we're setting, they're going to apply to their lives in the future. And if we're saying, okay, we can, fudge a little bit over here, and, then they're going to even take that even further. And so we have to be careful about the areas that we are allowing to be soft in. And I think Shabbat is one of those important areas. I think Shabbat is the key to a lot of our worship and just our understanding of our God. It's important. If we observe Shabbat in its intended way, we will experience the joy of Adonai in a unique and fresh way. This is from Isaiah. If because of the Sabbath you turn your foot from doing your own pleasure on my holy day and honor it, desisting from your own ways, from seeking your own pleasure and speaking your own word, then you will take delight in Adonai, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with all the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of Adonai has spoken. So he's saying that if you choose to set aside your ways, if you choose to stop doing your thing, then he's going to pour his blessings out on you, and you're going to experience Shabbat like you never have before. Thankfully, all the jobs that I've had have always been Monday through Friday kind of jobs. I never had a problem with an occupation on Shabbat. But Saturday was my day. Saturday was get up late, wash my car, listen to the radio, go to the flea market, or just do whatever. That was my time to have my fun. And so I remember, we went a few times consistently, and then I kind of slipped back and doing my own thing, and then I was convicted, because it is, the more I thought about the idea that this is an appointed time with my God. And consider those times where you will cancel appointments because you have already set an appointment with someone else. It's interesting how we're so quick to not offend a person, but it's easy for us to offend our God. And we'll put off his things and his commandments so we won't offend people. Another area that is challenging is, there's nothing wrong with camping. There's nothing wrong with fishing. In fact, I wish we could actually do that more. But a lot of times, folks will take the weekend and go and do that. And I know some folks who they'll hold their own Shabbat service up in the mountains or whatever. But the thing is, why don't we do that during the week? Why don't we just say, on Tuesday and Wednesday I'm going to go camping because I don't want to miss Shabbat on the weekend? Well, it's because we got a job. It's because we have bills. It's because we have a mortgage, or we have, whatever kind of payments we might have. And man, if we miss our bills, then we're going to get fined. We're going to have to pay a fee. If I miss my work, I'm going to have to answer to my boss. So again, it's that idea of when we don't want to offend people. We don't want to pay these earthly fines. But when it comes to our God, it's easy for us to say, you know what? I'm not going to show up because I'm going to do my own thing. So again, there's just more challenges to for you to chew on, to wrestle through, and to consider. Now, the next part is talking about how to keep Shabbat. I left out the part about why we don't do Shabbat today. Why is it that the Christian church doesn't do Shabbat? Because I think most everyone is here because we already have the understanding that we should be doing it. And I can point you to other resources that kind of explain how that transition happened. And so we'll quickly talk about how to keep the Shabbat. These are some just quick points on getting ready for or preparing or observing Shabbat. Number one, prepare for the Shabbat. This means doing some extra preparation on Friday so there is food prepared for Saturday. The house is clean clothes to wear, etc. The whole family should help prepare. Joe Lieberman, he wrote a book recently, right before he stepped down from wherever he was serving in the government. And he wrote a book, and he was promoting it as he was retiring. And I haven't read the book, but I just heard one thing that he mentioned about the book, and he said that because he's talking about his Jewishness and being raised Jewish, and one of the things that he said was that in his family growing up, every day they did something toward getting ready for Shabbat. Every day their family they did something, like maybe they already picked out their clothes that they're going to wear, or they started preparing the meal that they're going to have. But every day they did something to get them ready for Shabbat. I think that's a great exercise, because it keeps you focused on Shabbat. There's a guy who's one of my Facebook friends, and like every day he'll put on there, or it seems like every Sunday he'll say, only 7 days till Shabbat, clap, clap. He'll put that on there every Sunday. But that's just a nice mindset to have. It's like, okay, Shabbat's over, I'm already looking at the next Shabbat. So we can prepare not just physically by getting food ready and that sort of thing, but we can also prepare mentally and getting ready for Shabbat service. And even here at Front Range, since we all know the Torah schedule that we're on, we should be reading the Torah portion. So when those that are teaching on the Torah portion, we can all be ready for that. Or even, read through Matthew again up to where we're at and just kind of get your mind back on that. But there's different ways that we can prepare. The second thing is dress up. Even our appearance should be different than other days of the week. We are coming together to honor Adonai. He is worthy of the extra time it takes to get ready. For men, wearing a talit and kippah makes the day special, and for women, a head covering separates that day from others. And so whatever your tradition is, or whatever your thought is, make the effort. Make the effort to come dressed like you don't normally do throughout the week. If you're coming in cut off shorts, an old T-shirt, and hole in your pants, and that sort of thing, that's not setting Shabbat apart. In our family, well, growing up, we always had our Sunday clothes, and always had our my Sunday shoes, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with our kids, and it's kind of cute that even Moses understands that at his young age. When I grab the wrong clothes and I try and put them on him, he reminds me, he says, no, those are for shul. Those are shul. Those are shul. He'll tell me, those shoes are for shul, those pants are for shul. That, it's not something he's supposed to wear during the week. And it's like, well, that's great. I mean, I'm glad Margaret is instilling that in them too. But so what are those things that we can have? And also, I have a Shabbat kippah, or a feast day kippah. And I set that one aside, and that's the one that I wear for service. Again, it's just, to me, it just helps me to put my mind in a different place, that I don't wear my brown one, I wear my white one. And so it's just a way to help me to get into the mood of the Sabbath. And so we can do that for our children also. Let's get ready. Even for a Rev Shabbat dinner. Every Friday night, even if it's just our family, we still put out the tablecloth. We got the nice dishes. We got the glasses, and we're not using the regular glasses that we use during the week. And so we have things, and we set it up in a way that it's special than every other day of the week. And when we don't do that, our children miss it. When we don't do that, they really see that they miss the Shabbat. And like when we're out of town, we really see it when we're out of town, because we don't have all of our stuff, and our family doesn't appreciate it like we do. Number 3, show off the ring. Let others see the engagement ring that Adonai has given to us through his covenant. One of the ways we can do that is invite people over to share Shabbat dinner with you. If you have family, relatives, or whatever, friends, you can invite them over, and they can see what it's all about. And every time that we've had someone over to have a Rev Shabbat who's never done it before, they're really blessed. They're really blessed by it. I mean, they're like, wow, this is awesome. When they see all the things that happen, blessing the children, blessing the boys, blessing the girls, blessing the wife, blessing the husband, blessing the singles, so it's a blessing everyone. And if we do that every week, we might not get a chance to bless each other every day, but at least if we're doing it every week on Shabbat, it's awesome. It's a great practice to have. Number 4, remember and observe. Celebrate with a Rev Shabbat and Havdalah to show that Sabbath is separate from the rest of the week. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But how we can do Shabbat is with some of these traditions, because the text tells us to remember Shabbat and to observe Shabbat, but how we do it, it doesn't exactly say. And so we have these traditions that have been around for a long time that we've taken and we've adapted and we've changed and added things, taken away things. And so it's a way for us to start the Sabbath and end the Sabbath. They're bookends. Number 4, don't buy and sell on Shabbat. Again, this causes us to prepare. This causes us to get our mindset and our minds ready throughout the week and to be ready for the Shabbat. Number 6, make it a delightful day. Spend it with Adonai and don't pursue your own selfish interests. Delight means oneg. Do you realize that? When we have an oneg, some congregations call it oneg Shabbat. It's the delight of Shabbat. And that is, I think, it is one of the highlights, I think, of the day. We're all curious what everyone else made. We want to see what's in the crock pots and we want to eat. And so it's a fun time to sit and to eat with one another. And it should be a delight. And I'm glad at Front Range there's something that we do every Shabbat. We eat together, because that is how we build relationships. When we sit down together, we share a meal and we talk. All the times in Scripture, whenever you see a meal, there's a lot of meals being talked about in Shabbat or in the Bible. There's a lot. They're always eating, right? They're always at a table eating. Well, that just shows covenant. That just shows that you're in covenant with someone when you eat with them. And even Paul tells us that there's certain people we're not supposed to eat with. Those who've denied Yeshua, those who are apostate, those who are in immoral sin, we don't eat with them. Because again, that shows we're in covenant with them. I know you don't go out to eat with just anyone. You want to eat with those people that you know and that you love. And so anyway, that's an important thing. Finally, number 7, read the Torah. Spend some time alone with Adonai. It will be especially beneficial on Shabbat. So if you can, I know what we're trying to do here, it doesn't give you a lot of time to be alone. But say if you get up early, and that's one of the practices I used to try and keep, was to get up early by myself, read through the Torah portion, read through a psalm, read a proverb, chapter of the Proverbs. But if you can, find some time alone on Shabbat to read some of God's Word. I know, again, that was a lot of information. We could spend weeks talking about Shabbat, but I wanted to give the important parts of the things that people have questions about most of the time. I just wanted to cover those areas. The goal of this series of lessons is to present a brief overview of the beliefs and practices that characterize a Messianic Jewish congregation. More specifically, how these traditions are viewed and kept at the Front Range Messianic Community. For more information, please visit frontrangemessianic.com.